This next video is about John Longendorfer. He's a Korean War veteran and a member of the 1st SHORAN Beacon Squadron. This is one of the first Air Force's successful attempts at precision bombing. This is his story.
Yeah, I was born in Camden, New Jersey, and actually lived a good bit of my life there. I actually enlisted in Dover, Delaware, because my mother had moved down there to manage the radio station in Dover. So when I decided I was either going to get drafted or enlist, particularly after I quit my job, I went down to Dover, Delaware. I figured I'd hang out there for a couple of weeks. Turned out to be more like a few months. I forget how long exactly it was. But it seemed like I was never going to get in any branch of the service. I tried to enlist when the war first started. I tried enlisting in the Navy and the Marine Corps, and I got turned down for I couldn't pass the eye test. And so I thought, well, I'll just wait and get drafted. And when my call came for the draft, my draft board was in Tennessee. I didn't want to go all the way to Tennessee to take a physical, so I went with the group from Dover, Delaware. But they shipped my papers back to Tennessee, so I was no better off than when I started. And then I got a letter saying I had 30 days to enlist in the branch of my choice. So I went down to the recruiting office to join the Army, and I had already given my car away. I quit my job, so I was penniless and anxious to go. And the sergeant said, I asked the sergeant, I said, if I go in the Army, when can I go? And he gave me a date like 2 weeks from Tuesday or something. I said, oh, no, not another 2 weeks, you know. And he was recruiting Army and Air Force, so that's when I said, if I go in the Air Force, when can I go? And he says, I got a group one out tomorrow. I said, good, put me in. What I didn't know, instead of enlisting for 2 years in the Army, I was enlisted for 4 years in the Air Force, which, if I'd have known at the time, I think I'd have waited the 2 weeks. But I was just anxious to go, so that solved my problem. I just went home, packed the bag, and left the next morning.
How old were you?
Pardon me?
What was your age?
I was 21.
Okay.
I guess, yeah. So I went through the whole, like everybody else, basic training, and after basic training, I was assigned to radio school at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. And that was probably, without doubt, the worst thing I ever went through in my life. I think learning Morse code is sort of like music. If you don't have an aptitude for it, it's difficult. And I'm sure I had no aptitude for it because I was struggling. And I kept falling behind. It was a 36-week course. And you got some, technical stuff about radios and how to interpret weather reports and, all kinds of stuff that you never used. And also you had to learn how to type. Once I got out of radio school, I never saw a typewriter again for the next 4 years. But you had to learn how to type, which also I didn't have much aptitude for. So I kept washing back further. My class was long gone, and I'm still in the school. The sergeant, who was my instructor, kept threatening me with all kinds of horrible things. Take my one poor stripe away and send me to the Arctic to watch airplanes. One threat after another. And so you had to pass 20 groups a minute. So I got hung up in 12, I got hung up in 16. I finally got to 20. And the first, how they did it, you took code uninterrupted for 20 minutes. And they would take your paper with 20 minutes of code that you copied, and they would pick out a 5-minute segment and check it. You were allowed 3 errors in that 5-minute segment. And the first night I took it, I think I only had like 4 or 5 errors. I thought, oh, I'll be out of here tomorrow. And even my sergeant patted me on the back and says, hey, you're almost out of here again. Well, about 6 weeks later, I'm still sitting there trying to pass that code test. I had gone from the 4 errors the first night to like 8 the next night and 12 the next night, until I was getting more wrong than I was getting right. It was some kind of mental thing. I started anticipating, and I would write a character down before I completely heard the sound pattern. So I was getting way ahead of myself, and I'm making all these errors. Now the sergeant's really getting pissed. Yeah. And the threats keep coming. And I finally, I had to meet a board of officers to determine whether I would continue in school or not. They even offered me another school. But I was stubborn. I didn't want to be defeated by this thing. So I said, no, I'll stay there. I'll stay there till the bitter end. So I went in one night. The sergeant comes over with a big smile and he says, this is your last night. He said, I'm sending you out tomorrow on the job training. No prejudice. You're free and clear. When he said that, I sat down and passed the test. He took all the pressure off. I sat down and passed. The very next check, I had them all right. I went from like 100-some errors to all right in one night. It was just a mental block, whatever. And so that was great. That was a great moment. I'm out of here finally. So then I got my orders, and I had 7 days to report to Camp Stoneman in California. And I got there along with thousands of other guys, and then they took us by bus into San Francisco and put us on troop ships. And I think it was about 3,000 guys on the ship or something like that. And off we went across the Pacific. We landed in Yokohama, and then they took us all the way down to the southern tip of Japan by train, and we stayed at a base there. Had been an old Japanese Air Force base, and then they flew us from there to Seoul, which was about a 6-hour flight, and miserable flight, rocking and rolling all the way. Everybody got sick. It was that rough. And we landed in Seoul, and then, like I told you, we went to 5th Air Force headquarters, and they assigned us, and that's how I got in the first SHORAN Beacon Squadron. I had worked with other radio operators for the first three days, and the 4th day they put me on by myself. And in a number of weeks, maybe a month or so, I believe I was there up until Christmas time. I think I was at headquarters, which was in about 5 miles outside the city in Ewha College. I would get the mission thing all laid out and coded, and I would send it to. They would tell me which site to send it to. It took 2 sites to run a mission, so we would have to send the same message to 2 different sites, and then you'd have another mission for the next 2 sites, and then one site would be like a backup. If one of the other ones got knocked off the air or something, then the backup site would take over.
Right.
But they had to have 2 beams to reach the target and pinpoint that target.
Right.
And I wasn't at the time. It's funny, at the time I didn't know what kind of planes we were working with. I didn't know until probably a couple of years ago. I looked on that website and realized we were working with B-26s most of the time. There were some B-29s that were equipped with SHORAN equipment, and we did run some missions with B-29s, but it was mostly B-26s, and which was a pretty good plane. They were still using them in Vietnam. They still had some.
So this was state of the art technology at the time. This was a new precision bombing that we were.
And we were using, the strange thing is we were using old, almost outdated equipment to do it. It was just somebody realized that these SHORAN sets could be repurposed for the mission we were using for pinpoint targets.
Right.
They originally were just used for navigation. It was interesting, to say the least.